Hi guys, so this is going to be how I found out that I was pregnant and how I told my parents. First of all, I found out, I really don't remember the dates, but I found out, I don't know when, but when I found out that I was pregnant, I didn't believe it because it was a very, 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 very faint positive. So I had my doubt that I was pregnant. So I really didn't, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't do anything or nothing. So then like 2-3 days later, I took another pregnancy test and it was a lot darker. The second pregnancy test was one that I uploaded so you guys saw. That one was the one where you could actually see it. So yeah. The first person that I told was my sister because she, I don't know, I just, like, my faint positive one, I went to her room, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, I went to her room and I was like, oh my god, I might be pregnant, but then I don't know, and then she was like, why are you in my room, and I was like, cause I just told you, and she was like, you know what time it is, and I was like, yeah, and she's like, yeah, she was just like, I'm going back to bed. That was kind of her reaction. I don't know. And the second person I told was my boyfriend because my second test, he called me in school and he's like, hey, and I was like, we were talking and everything, and he was like, have you gotten your period? And I was like, no, I have something to tell you. So he's like, okay, and I was like, well, I took a test and it was saying positive, and I didn't know if I was really pregnant, so I took a test today and it was darker, so I'm pregnant. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, he was happy and he was kind of scared, but he was really, really happy at the same time and everything. And he tells me now that he kind of figured that I was pregnant, and I was like, well, how do you figure that? And it was like, my boyfriend smokes, he smokes, cigarettes and stuff like that. So like when I'm around him, or like I used to go over to his house, and like when he would smoke, I wouldn't care. But now, like when I went over to house for his, like a whole week, he was smoking, and then I would eat, and then I would get really, 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 really sick. And he's, he made a joke about it. He was like, ha ha ha, what if you're pregnant? And I was like, oh my god. And then, I'm pregnant, so yeah, he kind of, yeah. And how I knew that I was kind of pregnant was because I had a dream that I was, me and him were talking, and then my friend, he's a really close friend, he lives like right next, like across the street. Me and my friend were talking, and then, he's over here like, well, you should take a test. And I was like, okay. So I took a test, and my boyfriend came over, and he was like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm taking a test. And I was like, he's like, oh, okay, whatever, he didn't think anything of it. And I took the test, and it was positive, and he was like, my friend was like, oh my god, you're pregnant, like what? Like, what? I can't believe it. Never thought you would get pregnant and all this other stuff. And then my boyfriend was like, he was all happy, he hugged me and he kissed me, and he's like, oh my god, we're having a baby and all this other stuff. That's how I kind of knew I was pregnant, because I had that dream. So yeah. And then how I told my parents was after I took my second pregnancy test, the one that I uploaded. It was like a week after I took that test, and I was like, well, because I knew I was pregnant already, and my mom didn't, so I was like trying to figure out how I was going to tell her and everything, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do it like this. So my mom came home from work, I was making dinner, and I was like, well, Mom, I haven't got my period. And she's like, okay, well, let's go to the store, let's go buy you a pregnancy test, and you'll take it when we get home. That time, I didn't have to be, so I had to chug down like 5 water bottles. And then by the time we got home, I was like ready. I was like almost peeing and everything. And so I peed in a cup and I took the test and everything, and I kid you not, a line came up really fast. And this wasn't even first morning urine or anything. This was like 5-second urine, and it came up like fast. And so I was like, oh my god, I was on the phone with my friend, and I was like, I don't even want to show her. I don't want to do this. I'm scared, and like, but I already told my mom, so I had to show her and everything. So I walk outside. I walk slowly outside, out of the bathroom, and then I go up to my mom, and I hand her the test. And she was quiet at first. You know, she put the test down, and she was quiet. She didn't say anything to me, so I went back to the bathroom and I took a shower. Or I was gonna take a shower, but then she came, and she was like, well, I want to talk to him, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. You know, she started, saying a lot of things and everything, and it was just really, really stressing. So, that's how my mom found out, So she had to sink in it, and she's kind of okay now, but I don't know, I feel like, I don't know. Anyways, so how I told my dad. My dad doesn't live with me. My dad lives upstate, he only comes to visit every once in a while, and my dad's birthday was not too long ago, so I had a dream that I was going to tell my dad on his birthday, and that he found out, and I didn't want to do that because that would have spoiled everything. So I waited and waited, and not even like 2 days afterwards, my dad calls me, and I was crying before he calls me, and I was trying not to make it sound like I was crying, but every time he talked to me, I was just crying even more and crying even more. And he basically tells me, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And I was like, well, I have something to tell you. And he's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. This was all in Spanish because my dad's a Spanish speaker. But he was like, okay, well, tell me. And then I was like, well, I have a boyfriend. And he's like, well, I know that. And I was like, well, I had sex. And he's like, I kind of figured that. And I was like, well, and he's like, well, like, he kind of figured that. And then he started saying, you need to be, careful and all this other stuff. And I was like, well, that's not what I was going to tell you. And he's like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, then what were you going to tell me? I was like, well, me and my boyfriend, we went to the doctors because I missed my period. And we got an ultrasound done, and I'm pregnant. My dad, he stays quiet for a little bit, and he tells me, he's like, is he going to stay with you? And I was like, yes, he's going to stay with me. And he's like, is he going to be there for you? Is he going to, help you and everything? And I was like, yes. And so, yeah, he kind of just, he was calmer than my mom. And then he came back, like, yesterday, I think, and he wanted me to talk to him, sit down on the table and talk to him and everything. And he's like, well, what did I do to make it go like this? And I was like, you didn't do anything. This is all my doing. This was my decision. I decided to have sex and all this other stuff. And, I ended up pregnant, and I don't like the idea of abortion or adoption. But I know some people do that, but that's just not my type of doing. So, yeah. So my dad was just like, well, okay, as long... Oh, hold on, you guys are dying on me. So my dad was like, okay, well, he better be there for you. And I was like, well, he's gonna be there. And he's like, alright. He was crying, I was crying, and all that other stuff. And yeah, that's how I told my mom and dad. And how my oldest sister found out. This was like before my mom and dad found out. But my oldest sister, you know, her friend was here. Her name was Victoria. She has a son. She had him when she was 19, 18, I think. I don't remember. He's 4 now. But so she was here, and I told her before I told my sister, because I was like, well, hey, I have to ask you something. And she's like, okay, what is it? And I was like, well, I took this test and it says that I'm pregnant. And she's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I want to tell my sister, but at the same time, I know what she's going to tell me. And she's over here like, she was thinking that I was playing. And I brought out the test and I showed her, and she was so quiet for the longest time. And she was like, well, you need to tell her now. So I had like no choice to tell her or anything. So my Victoria's friend came over and I went inside and I went to my sister. I basically sat down next to my sister because she was eating, and I put the test right in front of her, and she was like, oh shit. And then, you know, of course she said the same thing my mom and dad told me, and she was like, you should get a boyfriend, you shouldn't do this and all this other stuff. And I was like, I don't believe in that. That's just not, like, if I get an, like, this is, like, I feel like if I get an abortion, I feel like I'm gonna be depressed, like, literally depressed. I feel guilty, and I'm gonna feel, I'm just, you know. And then if I get an adoption, I wouldn't, there's just no way I'm gonna have a baby for 9 months and give it away just like that. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't be able to do it. I don't know how other people can, you know. I, you know, give them props, but I wouldn't be able to do it at all. That's just not my thinking. And plus my boyfriend was like, nope, you're gonna keep it. So we kind of decided that I was gonna keep it. But yeah, I'm sorry this was kind of long, but this is how I told my boyfriend, my mom, and my sisters, and my dad, and then how I found out. Yeah, that's basically it. So like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.